Hey, future me at the beginning of the video with this audio. So here's the deal with this audio. I recorded this while I was not at my computer. I recorded it with my phone, and I was going to re-record it, but then I got sick, and yeah, let's just say trying to record for about 20 seconds just to make this intro is actually kind of difficult, which is incredible. So yeah, I'm not going to re-record probably 30 minutes of audio if this is how I'm sounding. So yeah. Sorry about the audio quality. Enjoy. So as of just a couple minutes ago, wow, it is really echoey in this closet. Holy shit. I've come out of the closet because it is really echoey. Yeah, I'm currently not actually at my desk, so instead I'm just going to speak in a bathroom. Oh god, it's even echoier in here. Fuck. So I saw a comment on one of my videos recently that was briefly talking about the Sega Saturn and PlayStation. I think it was probably in response to something I said in my SimCity video. I haven't touched that video since I uploaded it, so I don't remember exactly what I said. But either way, it was talking about... Yeah, let me get the elephant out of the room. With the reduced mic quality, it is clear I am not actually at my computer right now. I am spending some time with family, but I had this idea for a video that I wanted to briefly talk about, so I'm doing that right now. Yeah, sorry about the grandfather clock interruption. But what I was saying, though, was that the idea of retro is something that I've thought about a little bit because I think it is something that should probably be discussed a little bit. I don't think it's discussed too much in terms of what actually is retro, because that's a term that is very subjective, that is just thrown around. Like I've probably said it at least once in one of every one of my videos of like the main 11 that I've made over the past year or so. And I'll say this right now, my kind of basis for what is retro for when it comes to video games is about 2 video game console generations ago, okay? And I'll explain that real quick, because each video game generation is roughly 7 to 8 years. And at least how I seem to remember it, from my perspective, growing up, something like the Super Nintendo was already retro in the early 2000s, or really mid-2000s, because, well, all you gotta do is compare, I don't know, like Final Fantasy VI to Final Fantasy X. One of them is a 2D RPG, the other one is a 3D RPG. And even in that amount of time between the two games, I don't know how much time actually passed, it might have only been 10 years, but you can see the difference. We're even skipping over the PS1 generation of 3D graphics. And don't get me wrong, there's some pretty decent looking PS1 games. But don't try and tell me that Final Fantasy VII's player models are anything to write home about. But there is a benchmark that I think is worth at least figuring out. What is retro? Because here's the thing, and there was a comment that was talking about this on the SimCity video. Basically, there was a guy, and I'm having to paraphrase the comment because I don't have it pulled up in front of me, but he was saying that they're like 40, and what is retro is the Atari, not the PS1, okay? And I saw that and I thought, no, you don't need to go back to 1977 for retro. You can already go back to like 1995 for retro. And the reason why I say that is because even like, okay, this is going to be a weird metric, but consider the angry video game nerd for a minute, okay? The first videos that James Rolfe did were on NES titles, all right? Actually, I think most of, if not all of them, were pretty much NES titles. And that was already considered retro in, I think he started in 2004, but let's just say 2005. The NES came out in North America 20 years prior, okay? And that was already retro. So if we use just the 20-year benchmark as that, the 20-year ruler as that, well then 20 years ago, the PS2 had been out for 2 years. Yes, the PS2 came out in North America in 2000. Yeah. That fact alone was something that I thought about that and was like, holy shit. The PS2 really is old. I remember when the PS3 came out. I remember when that launched. I'm going to make a bunch of you feel old as well right now. The PS3 came out 16 years ago. So it is, well, in most countries, it's not legally old enough to drink, but it is close. In 2 years, the PS3, if someone was born on the day the PS3 came out, in 2 years, in some countries, they would be able to drink. In America, no, because America just, the age is 21 for some reason. But in, like, if you lived in Montreal, even though that's a city, not a country, but if you lived in Montreal, you would be able to drink if you were born on the same day the PS3 came out 2 years from now. But there are people who are alive now who are capable of making decisions. Decisions like, am I going to play Mario Kart 8 or am I going to play Splatoon? It's just very simple child impulse decisions like that who were not alive when the PS3 was being sold. Think about that. Because the PS4 came out, if off the top of my head, I want to say it was late 2013. We're already at the 9-year anniversary of the PS4. And so anyone that is 6 right now grew up in a world where the PS3 was not really being sold, if at all. So why I say all this is because ultimately COD montages are very retro, okay? Playing the Xbox 360, going into a Modern Warfare 2 lobby, yeah, that's so retro now that they remade the game. But again, I think this does beg the question of what is the definition of retro? I think it needs to be based off of some amount of time that has passed since the initial creation of or release of the thing. So, right, going back to like the AVGN. You had 20 years between when the NES came to the United States and when the first AVGN episode was made. Well, does that mean that like Castlevania 2, which I think came out in 1987, isn't retro? So does that mean only the console itself is retro, or what about all the titles associated with it? Again, that could then mean that something like, I think Kirby came out in 1990. That isn't technically going to be retro until 2010. Or if the years for what would be considered a retro game is less than 20, let's say 15 years. That's why I think that this would be interesting to figure out and also see what other people's thoughts are, because I just found it... I'm sorry if this does... I hope this doesn't come across insulting to the person that wrote this comment. But that's why I did kind of have a bit of a laugh reading the comment that only the Atari could be retro, because that's not true. Most people generally do agree that the NES, Super Nintendo, Sega Genesis, basically up to the Super Nintendo at least, is considered retro. But the Super Nintendo was a console that was still being sold, 30 years ago? And I don't think 30 years should be the definition of retro. I think it needs to actually be less. Just because there will be adults that have never played a PS2 game. Not because they didn't have one, but because the PS2 wasn't being sold anymore. Games weren't, okay, there were actually games being made for the PS2 up till 2014, surprisingly, if memory serves me right. That was wild, but I guess that happens when you have the most sold console of all time. But you get my point. Like, there are people, like me, okay? When I was growing up, the PS1 wasn't being sold anymore, at least from what I recall. Like, you weren't going in and buying a PS1, you were buying a PS2. And then by the time the PS3 came out, yeah, you weren't buying a PS1 new from, like, I don't know, Walmart. If the whole idea is childhood nostalgia, ultimately that is kind of what this is all based off of, I think. Where the reason why someone would call the NES retro, or begin to call it that, is because they remember back in the day when they were 5 years old or 6 years old, opening that thing up on Christmas. That's the reason why, I would think, is the fundamental reason for that. Ultimately, like, it is the difference between being a child and then being a grown adult. Basically, it ends up being like, am I going to, at age 20, look back at the PS2 and say it's a retro console because I remember when I was 4 years old holding the DualShock 2 controller? Or is it going to be that I look back at the PS3 and call it a retro console because I remember being, how old would I have been? Like 8, I guess, yeah. About 8 years old, holding the DualShock 3 controller? Or do I only look back at the PS1 as being a retro console because I wasn't born yet? I think that is the foundation that at least my experience with these consoles has been where, like, I look back at the PS1 and can personally easily call the PS1 retro because I didn't grow up with it. At least I don't remember like waiting in line at a store to get Final Fantasy VII. I don't remember like waiting in line for any game for the PS1. But I also didn't do that for the PS2 either because I was like 4. This is something that I want to see people's thoughts on because it is ultimately a subjective thing. At the end of the day, it is a subjective thing. But I think that there is some kind of objectivity that you could achieve with this because generally speaking, in just culture alone, we do consider for reference, it is not top of the hour, so I do not know why that clock is chiming right now. It's only been 15 minutes. But the point that I was making is... Fuck. God damn you, grandfather clock. I forget what I was saying. Generally speaking, we view the 1980s as retro, okay? Just we already went through the whole, like... 80s revival stuff that happened with pop culture that still sometimes is going on. Not as much now, but that was what happened. So the 80s is definitely retro right now. But so is the 90s, if we're honest. Just think about music. For instance, Nirvana Nevermind is 30 years old now. That's an old album. Nevermind didn't come out yesterday. It came out 30 years ago. That's why I think that, at minimum, if the console was released before Nevermind, which the Super Nintendo was, it should be a retro console. But at the same time, I still also am going to even argue that the PS2 does begin to fit into that. I think, I'll say this, I think when it comes to, because I know that people will definitely debate the PS2 one, but from this point onward, when I do refer to a retro console, I will be including basically up to the N64, okay? I don't think anyone's going to really have a problem with that because I think people already viewed the N64 as retro. But in a couple... Fucking hell. I've had this terrible cough for like the last month, by the way. This is what we in the industry call foreshadowing. But all I was saying is that in the next couple of years, though, and maybe even like going into next year, I might even just change my mind after this. I'll see what you guys think. Maybe someone will convince me a different way, but I think I will begin to start considering the PS2 as a retro console because it really is. Like, seriously, think about it. If the NES was already considered retro when the first AVGN episode came out, then the PS2 is more retro than that was at that time. Yeah, anyway, let me know what you think of that. Subscribe to all the channels. They are showing up on screen right now. Twitter doesn't seem like it has died yet, so I guess follow me at AbsoProblem. And, oh yeah, by the way, an update, because I did make that video about Twitter. I'm seeing a couple other social medias come out. I think I saw one that was being talked about that was kind of being spread around called Hive. No fucking clue what it is. Someone wants to try and sell me on Hive, go ahead and be my guest. Yeah, I'm kind of just waiting on everything because I've been gone for the past week or so because Thanksgiving. Happy holidays, by the way, guys. I just lost my train of thought. But yeah, I guess I'm still technically on Twitter, but I've been gone for like the past week or so. So yeah, I'm going to be getting back into the schedule. Also, another thing, computer update. It's still not built. I'm getting really close, guys. I'm about to have all my components. I really am excited about this computer build. It just is really exciting. So I will definitely be talking about that in detail when I finally build it. But That's not right now. That is for another time. Maybe it'll be at a time where this video is considered retro.